This is the Giraffes Don't Eat Steak podcast, a show that brings you marketing stories, tips, hints, and much more. A treat for those who want to succeed in business or marketers who just want to learn. Hello, Alex.
Hello, how are you?
I am good. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Very well. Getting into the Christmas spirit.
Are you? Okay.
Ding dong.
I have brought another guest today. I've brought my friend Thomas Coles, who is an expert. But Thomas, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Hello, everybody, and hello, both of you. Thank you for involving me in this. In terms of my background and what leads you to describe me as an expert, I've founded 5 businesses over the years, exited 5, all in technology and professional services. And therefore, I hope I bring a little bit of expertise that might be relevant to some of the audience. In particular, my background is running those businesses using referrals. In other words, relying for new business on my network and asking for referrals in order to find new prospects.
Oh, fantastic. Sorry, and I just realized the reason I got stuck on expert is because Thomas and I met through an awesome network called the Camelot Network. And actually, the terminology that's used there is experts. And I suddenly realized, oh, this is probably not common terminology that I'm saying. So if you're wondering why I faltered a little bit, is because I suddenly realized, oh, that's internal terminology, right, that I'm using externally. But yes, that's where Thomas and I met. And I've been lucky enough to be into 2 presentations on referrals that Thomas has done. So I can say with absolute confidence that I do regard Thomas as an expert on referrals. So, Thomas, referrals. Alex and I are not good at this. We will be honest. I think we can both say that, right? It's not our strong suit, although I have made improvements since listening to your talk. But talk to us about why most people don't prioritize this and why you think it's an important part of your marketing mix.
So there are 2 different elements in answer to that question. The first is that a lot of people generally have an awareness of how important referrals are to part of the marketing mix, part of the lead generation mix in their organization, but they don't necessarily remember to systematically apply that realization in the moment that they are with somebody who they could ask for a referral. So lack of systematic behavior is one of the things that can go wrong for an organization. The other that can go wrong is the way that they ask. So if people remember to ask for a referral, it typically is something like, I'm looking for more work at the moment. Do you know anyone who you could introduce me to? Fairly benign, generic question like that. And disaster strikes, because if they're talking to someone with whom they've got a trusting relationship, they've got good rapport, the person generally will have the best of intentions, the willingness in principle to help. And that will manifest itself because they will say, oh, yeah, I'm happy to help. I'll have a think. And then nothing ever comes of it. And you're nodding because you've probably heard that or even said it yourself.
I've said it myself.
Very recently too, as well,
Uh,
actually.
So, do those resonate for you? Does that sound like the reasons that you said, Erica, that you're not good at this stuff? Is that why, do you think?
yeah, no, I definitely think I agree with you. What do you think, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, you need to have a well thought out system rather than just off the cuff. Ah, it was great working with you. If you know anyone else who needs the service, let me know. Hit me up. And just as you said, Thomas, the majority of the responses you will get are, yeah, yeah, of course. And then you say goodbye, and the person is already thinking about a cupcake, and they've completely forgotten about what you just talked about.
Yeah, yeah. I characterize it that, say you're in a coffee shop with somebody or you're finishing a meeting with somebody, if you remember to ask, they give that response of yes, I'll have a think, and then by the time they get to the tube or wherever they're going next, they've forgotten.
Yeah.
And if they remember at all, it's probably 6 weeks later, and they think it's a bit embarrassing to come back to you at that point, so they
Yeah.
then choose not
Yeah.
to. And you've probably been guilty of that as well. I know I have. So,
Yeah.
so part of what can go wrong is the way that people ask. Erica, I think you also asked about why should referrals be important? And
Yes.
I think this is a really important topic to explore. Forgive me, I'm going to sound like a statistician for a moment. There's a number of really compelling pieces of evidence that it set out why this matters. Firstly, for any salespeople, this is quite an important statistic. 70% greater chance of winning the deal if the lead source is a referral than any other lead source. That's
Wow.
based on data from HubSpot. They've analyzed billions of rows of data from their customers and identified that referrals have a 70% greater chance of being won than any other lead source. I mean, why would you not therefore want more referrals and less of anything else? I think the reason that is the case is that regardless of any protest that buyers might try to claim otherwise, the vast majority of people who are making a buying decision do so emotionally and then post-rationalize it. So
Yeah.
our job as salespeople is to convey sufficient credibility that they make a decision in our favor in the first place, and that they're able to justify that decision to stakeholders, their boss, their shareholders, their wife, whatever the stakeholder might be. Therefore, the best way to establish credibility is, of course, to start with someone recommending us, which is what a referral is.
Well, I mean, the strongest form of marketing often is the word of mouth. I mean, my brother has his own like windows and door handyman kind of business. That's what he does, and his business is strictly word of mouth. And he's I mean, he's tried a little bit of kind of other bits of marketing, but there is nothing stronger than having a recommendation from somebody you trust that has no affiliation with this business and doesn't have any skin in the game. There isn't really anything stronger.
Yeah, quite. Let me share another statistic with you to reinforce this point. 83% of your satisfied clients, and therefore this applies to anybody, 83% of your satisfied clients are willing to give a referral if they are asked, but only 29% do so without being asked. So I would argue that our job, anybody running business, anybody in a sales role, anybody in a marketing role, or customer success, account management, and so on, our job is to target, or if you want to be forthright, to exploit the 54% who sit there patiently waiting to be asked for a referral. And if you're not doing so, then you're missing an opportunity.
So let's talk a little bit about that asking for a referral, because I was recently in a network and there was a place to ask for referrals. And I noticed the difference. So some people said, "Oh, I'm looking for owners of accounting firms." And other people said, "Oh, I'm really looking for an introduction to Joe Soap at XYZ Limited." What is your recommendation in terms of the specificity of asking for referrals? Is there a gold standard? Is there a rule? Is it just general? What do you suggest?
So there is a delicate balance to be struck in how one asks for referrals. Firstly, there's got to be a lot of hygiene factors in place. The atmosphere of the conversation, the atmosphere of the relationship needs to be right, such that you feel comfortable asking. And there are all sorts of circumstances in which a very good relationship might not be right in the moment.
Mm.
But it's worth noting that the typical referrer who is willing to give you referrals will, over the lifetime of a relationship, be willing and able to give you 10 referrals.
Oh, wow.
So a common misconception is that you can only ask one person once, and once they give you a referral, that's it. So that's one thing to note. Once you've got into the habit, stay in the habit with any one individual. To properly answer your question about how to ask and about that balancing act that needs to be struck, what we need to do in asking for referrals is not be generic, but be specific. So instead of I've got a morass of names in my head, how do I choose which one I'm going to send to you? It's too difficult in the moment. I'll think about it.
Mm.
we need to get people to come up with a name there and then. It's easy to do. You just have to help them to filter through the morass of names down to one name. But of course, that's also difficult, that you don't give them such a fine filter that they don't come up with anybody, because they don't know anybody that looks like that. Therefore, for any member of the audience, anybody who is asking for a referral, how to ask will depend on who they are talking to, and therefore the likely demographics of the network of the person they're talking to, the referrer that they are talking to. So that might look like coming up with a name, as you were describing, by doing some research in advance. Who does this person know? Therefore, who could they introduce me to? Or it might look like coming up with in effect, a filter in the moment. So in your example, Erica, you might want to do introductions to chief marketing officers in insurance brokers, let's say. So
Yeah.
then, as you've already alluded to, you would simply ask the question outright. I would like to meet more CMOs in insurance broking. Do you know any? That may or may not work based on the network of the person you're talking to.
Yeah, it's not a one size fits all, is it? And I think this is probably why people, because as soon as you start thinking about that, you're like, oh, I've got other things to do, and you move on. But once you've taken the time to really figure this out, then it becomes easier, right? I think it's just about you have to sit still and think about, okay, who do I want? And because that's the question, who do I want? If you're asking for a referral, you need to know who you want,
Well, so
which
this is
means
firmly in marketing territory. You need to know
exactly. So
your
you need to know
ICP.
who exactly. But
And
and that's a lot of what Alex and I talk about all day long, is a lot of people haven't done that work. And so they're like, oh, I help everyone. And so then the referral request is, oh, anybody.
Anyone, you know.
But then as soon as you say anybody, the referrer is blank because
it doesn't trigger the neurons in order to the
Yeah.
synapses in order to actually produce a name there and then. So you're back to the age-old problem. So you're absolutely right. If people don't have an ICP defined, maybe the fallback option would be not I can sell to anybody, but think of it as I can sell to anybody who has budget for what I do now. That's a massive filter already, because the do they have budget also implies they've got a level of seniority in order to carry budget. It implies they've got the authority to spend budget, both of which are really useful characteristics in a buyer, of course. And the now bit is really important because it implies, and it is implicit, that the referrer will have had a recent enough conversation with the referee that they know that they've got budget in the foreseeable future to tackle some problem. And in particular, some problem that the referrer knows we the seller, can help with.
yeah. And again, that's again how understanding the referrer that you're asking, knowing what do they know. So if they're a person who wouldn't have a clue if anyone has a budget or not, then that would not be an appropriate filter. You'd probably freak them out, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, there's a little bit of work to be done to get that questioning right.
Mm. Uh, and are there any key differences that you have identified between B2B and B2C referrals?
Great question. So the technique can apply universally B2B or B2C. There are some differences though, for sure. Firstly, this technique works better in person, i.e. face to face or on a one-to-one Teams or Zoom type scenario. It works less well digitally or by email, whatever. Therefore, B2B, it is easier to apply because you tend to have these sorts of one-to-one sessions more regularly in a B2B environment. So B2C, there's usually a higher volume of customers, and therefore you can't do one-to-one asking in person. So you're probably going to have to rely on some form of digital or equivalent mass technique, unless you are in retail and you can make it part of the shop floor patter for the the sales team. That probably therefore narrows it down to retail that's high end. Luxury retailers can have that one-to-one relationship with
High
people who
ticket
come into the
items.
store. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas, well, let's choose a brand that doesn't exist anymore. Woolworths would not have had that one-to-one relationship with the people coming into the store. There's just a volume of people coming every day. So in that environment these days, B2C probably think online, and you would be thinking you've got to ask digitally, but you could still use the same style, but you'll get a much lower response rate.
Mm.
So in terms of response rate, I tend to find that if I'm asking for referrals in the right environment with the right atmosphere, I remember to use the right technique, which I've been using for 25 years, then I can get close to a one-to-one ratio between asking and getting. I,
Wow.
I work on the assumption of 2 to 1 because then I make sure I keep myself accountable for doing it enough. In B2C, you would probably expect to have a much, much lower ratio if you're asking electronically, probably, as is often the case for organizations that already have referral schemes in place, more like 50 to 1, something like that, would be considered good, just for the avoidance of doubt. In B2B, for people who are starting out on this journey, they will probably firstly feel awkward themselves to begin with, and therefore that will come across, and it has an impact on the ratio that they achieve in the early days. But you should be expecting to achieve a 4 or 5 to 1 ratio in the early days of applying a technique like this. And then as you get more rehearsed and more confident doing it, to be honest, just in the habit, then you would expect your ratio to improve towards the 2 to 1 point.
Do you have a follow-up process, or do you have a kind of a strict step 1, 2, 3, 4 process in your mind when you're going through this referral process?
So what's actually most important is remembering to ask as opposed to the follow-up. So the element where I'm most strict with myself is having, even 25 plus years later, having the habit and a reminder of the habit every week, so that I'm thinking about the meetings I'm going to be going to. Ideally, I'm doing some prep, looking at the person I'm going to be meeting, thinking about who they might know, and therefore either asking outright for an introduction, like Erica described earlier, or considering what types of people they might know, so that I can then ask a question with the right filter. So the habit is the most important thing. In terms of follow-up, there are two different types of follow-up needed, of course. One is to follow up the ask where there's a have a think response, to actually say, okay, have you thought?
Yeah.
Who have you thought of, sort of
Yeah.
thing. In other words, to remind the person that they made that commitment with no expectation that they'd ever have to do anything. So that's one element to follow up. The second is, if a person has said they will introduce you, then ideally they'll be sending an email to the referee, copied to you, so that you've then got control of follow up from there on. It's really imperative to follow that email up really quickly if it comes. But if the referrer has not sent that email, you need to be following up to remind them to send it. And that's the same as any other sales follow up activity. It needs to be reasonably frequent, polite, but just keeping people aware that they've made a commitment to you.
So just switching to the other side of the fence now, something I struggle with is the referring part because I don't like how without steaming, like I don't want to put my friend or my colleague or whatever in, so that they're hammered by a salesperson and then they hate me for the rest of their lives. But also there's GDPR, like, so you talked about sending the email and copying them, but then that's sharing the email address. Can I do that? And maybe my marketing brain is too, and my insurance brain is too risk averse. But how do you counter those things if you are, because you may need to um, give the the person you're asking for referrals some comfort in that regard as well, right?
You might have to reassure them, yes. So this again will differ B2B and B2C. B2B, they're almost certainly going to be sharing a business email address. I would question why if they're sharing a personal email address in making a business introduction.
Mm.
So therefore, there are, as far as I'm concerned, no GDPR issues. It's one-to-one, it's a closed network, it's normal course of doing business, and they're only going to refer you if in their opinion, it will be valuable to the referee. Therefore, there should be no reason for the referee to complain about that, unless you are making multiple introductions to that referee every week. Then I think they'd be perfectly justified to tell you to stop. In a B2C world, very different matter, of course. But all organizations already have, many B2C organizations already have established referral principles where they may be giving away free product or free sample or something in return for the referral. In effect, there's a lead capture form where someone can give that referral. This is the same principle. So whatever mechanism, whatever policy perhaps they've got at the bottom of that lead capture form they're choosing to apply, the same in principle applies to the act of asking for a referral and getting that email.
Okay, all right, that makes sense.
Well, I think, sorry, Erica.
Go for it, Alex.
No, I was just going to say, because when you're saying that, it reminded me of a situation that we came across with the call center in a B2C product. And their clients that they were speaking to, they were asking them to give their names of their
Friends.
whatever, over the phone and their numbers. And then the call center would then start calling those people, which obviously breaches a million different GDPR regulations. So that's, something you should be aware of that is just not okay, especially on the B2C side.
And is a very, very likely to be a very unsuccessful sales approach. There is no credibility established unless the call center then says, so-and-so recommended we speak.
That was the script, yeah. The script was, we got your number from John. He thinks you'd love this product. Can I tell you about it?
Yeah, but you're right. There are inevitably more hoops to jump through in any B2C marketing than there are B2B. For good reason. I'm not objecting to that.
No. And then just the wording. I know this sounds quite silly, but the wording of, so if I'm referring you to Alex, what do I say to Alex? Like, hey, Alex. So in my email where I'm copying you, hey, Alex, I met Thomas and I think he's great. You should talk. Or like how much detail about our relationship? How much, like, what's the balance in there?
It's a great question. There probably isn't time to fully answer it now. In very brief summary, I think that email should be no more than 2 sentences.
Yeah.
One should be establishing my credibility with Alex based on your relationship with me. So how we know each other, probably you would only be making a referral if I've done a good job for you or some such. Hence, there is a story, a case study in that one sentence. And then the second sentence is why you think it'd be useful for Alex to talk to me.
Okay.
And that's probably in the context of a conversation or something you know about Alex in terms of challenges he's facing with marketing or sales, in my case.
Okay. And then would it be I'm copying Thomas and I'm copying Alex and I'm sure he'll follow up and then back off? Or how do you close that?
I tend to close those emails very simply. So I've done the first sentence, establishing credibility. I've done the second sentence, explaining why I think it'd be useful to the recipient. And then I simply close with over to the two of you. Because it's not so salesy as I'm sure so-and-so will follow up. And I don't think you should feel awkward about that. If you think about the way referrals work, the world runs on people knowing people, one's network, referrals, whether you recognize them as referrals or not. You are bound to be giving referrals frequently in your personal life for tradespeople, plumbers, electricians, someone to mend the washing machine. All sorts of times, you're either asking friends or they're asking you, and it's probably second nature. You just have to apply the same principle at work. And I think you've hit a really important point, maybe the right point for us to finish on. Referrals should be reciprocal, because that's how the world goes round. It's not enough that you're constantly asking and not giving anything back. You might not be giving back to the same person, but in general, you should be expecting to be giving as many referrals as you receive.
Fabulous. Wow, Thomas, that has been really great. And even though I've heard you twice before, I've made more notes. So ever giving font of knowledge. Alex, anything else you want to ask?
Um, no, I mean, I really like that point that you just made about that we're doing it anyway. I think that's a really, really good point because we really are when you think about it, when you're just talking to someone who it could be anything about like a trip they did and they did it with a tour guide or something and you did something they're going to the same town and you say, well, actually I went there and I did a trip with so and so. He showed me around the city. It was really, really good. Um, but we can do that in our business lives and monetize
And
it.
in a more structured way, right? Just more structured to make sure you're capitalizing on those stats that Thomas shared with us. So we're not leaving anything on the table.
So when I run sessions on how to ask for referrals with my clients, I generally start by asking around the table of all of the participants, when did you last ask for a referral and when did you last give one? And of course, because of the context, they typically ask in a work professional persona.
Yeah.
Some people are doing it and some aren't. If I then repeat the question, what about personally? They've almost all given a referral that same week because a
Yeah.
friend needs a vet or whatever the specialism
Yeah.
might be. And there's this realization, this light bulb moment. Oh, I do this all the time.
Hmm. Yeah,
Oh,
and
that's
just break that
fabulous.
barrier because I guess it's seen that when you're talking about when you say referral, people think about sales, I guess, and then if you're not in that world, it can be you might feel some kind of resistance to that word, but if you just try and normalize it by like exactly you're saying and relate it to something they're already doing, I guess it just completely changes the mindset of what the task is.
So we haven't covered it, and there isn't time, I guess. There are lots of self-limiting beliefs that stop people in all sorts of different aspects of marketing and sales. That what you've just described is one of them.
Hmm.
Yeah. I actually have another question, Thomas. There are some businesses that we've worked with who have only relied on referrals. And it's a good model, I guess, if it works for you and you're getting enough business on referrals. But there's a point where you can see if you're looking at a scale of business that your referrals are dying down, maybe because they're not asking. So that could be one of the questions, but that some form of marketing is needed. What are your thoughts on pure referral businesses versus some sort of marketing mix, or is it totally up to the business? What are your thoughts on that?
So I'll give you more statistics
Mm,
to help answer that question. Various multiple data sources, so I won't name where this data comes from. In most businesses, 55% average of revenue comes from its existing customers. The next biggest source of leads and the next biggest source of revenue is referrals. Now, it varies a bit, but let's say an average of 29% of revenue comes from referrals. The next biggest source is what in my profession we call coattailing. That is following customers when they change jobs, or in B2C world, maybe following customers when they move house. Those sorts of situations. There's some trigger to put them into a buying process, some compelling event. So that represents up to 16% of revenue. This
okay.
is global data averaged. Now, if you add up 55 plus 29 plus 16, there's not a lot left. Why would you rely on, for new business, because existing customers clearly are under control, for new business, why would you rely on anything other than the biggest global lead source, which is referrals?
Okay, that makes sense.
I am conscious that I'm talking to two marketeers when I say that.
We won't argue with you on camera. We'll beat you up quietly afterwards. But no, it makes sense. I mean, again, it depends on your type of business. We've spoken about B2B versus B2C, but all businesses should have referrals in some part of their marketing mix. So that is a given. The extent of which is, needs to be determined. But yeah, absolutely. So Thomas, if people want to get help from you or more of this wisdom, how do they find you?
So there's more information on the topic generally on my website, which is solvereferrals.com, or I'm very happy to put my contact details into the podcast. So I can send you a slide in order to include at the end if you like.
Fabulous. And you're on LinkedIn, obviously. People can find you on LinkedIn.
Yeah, of course, you can find me on LinkedIn, and generally people are finding me with Google if they're looking for referrals these days.
Oh, there we go. Look at you. See, you are using marketing, Thomas.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. That has been really exciting for me. I've made lots of notes. I'm improving all the time, Thomas. I think I was stuck on the giving, so now you've given me some tips on that email. So that's helpful to me. That was my biggest takeaway today. Alex, anything you want to end with?
No, I think we covered everything. I just want to say thank you very much for your time, Thomas. I really enjoyed it.
Any last advice, tips, your top 3 tips, Thomas, you want to leave our listeners with?
So thank you both. I've really enjoyed the opportunity to talk this through. I love this topic. In terms of top 3 tips, just to reiterate, you have to form a habit. You have to get into the behavior of asking for referrals consistently. How you do that is going to be down to you personally and what works for each individual that's listening. The second thing is that you need to ask in a certain way such that you don't get the "I'll have a think." Classic problem is "I'll have a think." And the third point I would make is that ideally you do some prep. So when you know you're going to be meeting somebody who you could ask for a referral, have a look at LinkedIn in advance and work out who they know, because there's probably a golden nugget in there that is in effect your ICP, and you could just ask outright, please would you introduce me to Fred?
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, as always, Alex. It's been a pleasure. And Thomas, I'm sure I will see you again soon.
Thank you both.
Keep well.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye-bye. That wraps up this episode of Giraffes Don't Eat Steak. Thanks for joining us. I hope you found value in our discussion and got some new ideas to apply to your own business. Tune in next week for another round of marketing insights and inspiration. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. We appreciate you listening. Catch you next time on Giraffes Don't Eat Steak.